Hello again everybody, we are continuing on with our text adventure tutorial today. Now I had mentioned in the last video that we were going to actually get on to making the battle state and things like that, but I actually think it's more useful at this stage to define the loot table, because if we don't do it now, then after we've done the battle state we'll have to do it then, and then we'll have to go back to the battle state to add it all in. So if we just do that now, get it out of the way, then we can do the battle state next time. But this is still a very interesting part of the process, because what we're going to do is I've got open the text adventure right here, and we're going to define another function here to allow us to just check a loot table. And I have a .txt open here, and I'm going to make sure that is saved. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to just make sure that's saved as loot.txt. That'll do. No extension. That should do it. And then there it is there. So we're going to go into this table in just a minute, and we will read the items in that table and bring those into the actual game itself. Now the way it's going to work is I'm going to have basically 4 lines of different loot. My first line is going to be my most common loot, so things like health potion, wooden shield, that sort of stuff, common stuff, and I separate everything with a comma, and I make sure I do a comma at the end as well. And in my middle layer I do like a maybe like a mega health potion, bronze shield, and then my next one. So as I go, I get, it gets more and more, rare. So as I'm going to be selecting these items as I defeat harder enemies. Steel sword. Think of these on the fly now. Iron shield. Pretty bit. So I've had iron shield, I think, maybe. I don't know. Tell me what you came up with in the comments or something. And then like the level stuff here, and do like the top rarity. Maybe the guy drops diamond and I don't know. Oh yeah, this is what I used last time. Invisibility, cloak. Okay, so I'm actually going to just populate these with a few more bits. I'm going to cut back to here in a second, and then you'll see a completed loot table. So I've finished my loot table now, and you can see everything I've got here. So I have the least rare items in my top row, then a little bit more rare here, a little bit more rare here, and then the rarest items in my bottom row that are going to give my hero like a quite a big buff on the bottom there. Everything is split up with a comma. Just realised what I've done as well. I need to make sure there's no spaces in between these bits here, so just make sure everything's nice and tight, and there's commas at the end. It's going to tell me it's wrong, but it doesn't know what I'm trying to do. It doesn't know that I don't mind about the spelling errors at the minute. So it's basically, I've got all my items here, they're all nice and tight together, everything's separated by a comma, and I've got a comma at the end there. So I'm just going to save this and get rid of it. So loot.txt is just there now. So before I I obviously don't want this to be underneath my actual game, I want this to be up with the rest of the stuff I've defined here. So I'm just going to call it loot, so def loot. And the items I'm going to pull through for this are the enemy list and the enemy number. Okay, and I'll explain those a little bit more in a minute. It's just because, again, these are 2 variables that are these get created in the battle state side of things. So the enemy list is the random list that we've got of enemies, and the enemy number is actually a random number which selects a position in that list. So basically this is just saying take through whatever the enemy is that you've defeated and whatever the position, like it's just saying take through the enemy you've defeated here. We're going to use that. That'll make more sense later on down the line, but it's a bit iffy which way around to program these things, because if we do that first and there's variables in that we haven't seen, obviously we're going to do this first, so there's going to be the odd variable in this we've not seen. So what we need to do, we need to open up this file first of all. I've been posting these to Reddit and a lot of other places, and people have been telling me to not open, well, to open in a certain way. I've totally forgotten offhand, but this way will work, and I really do apologise to those people who told me how to do it differently, because there's a way of opening it and using it and closing it all, just basically making it a little bit more efficient. But for what we're trying to do, this will work fine. But if you want to do something more efficient, there are more efficient ways out there. So I'm going to open the open up my loot table, and I'm going to make 4 variables. I'm going to do loot table common. I'm going to do loot table uncommon, loot table rare, and then loot table ultra rare. Ultra rare. Ooh, that doesn't look good. There we go. Ultra rare. Remember your camel case there. Make sure that you're capitalizing every word which is joined up. So what is going to be in loot table common? Well, that is going to be the first line of the text file. So to get the first line of the text file into there, we use file.readline, and to get the next line, we do exactly the same. File.readline, and the next line will do exactly the same. And there's probably a much more efficient way of doing this as well, but we're going to do it this way. So readline, if you don't know already, will read the initially we'll read the first line in a text document. Every time the function is called after that, it will then read the next line and the next line. So this is reading line 1, then this is line 2, then this is line 3, and this is line 4, which is why we put our loot, I'll just open that up, which is why we put our loot in that sort of order. So uncommon is the top row, common is the top row, uncommon is the second one, rare is the third one, and ultra rare is the fourth one. So that's why they're set out like that. Now, what I need to do is I need to split these up. Again, there's probably different ways of doing this. So all I need to do is do loot table common equals itself dot split, and I'm going to be splitting it by, oh, actually need to put some speech marks around that. Maybe splitting that by a comma. So I'm just going to do the other 3, and I'll jump back to this in a second. Okay, so what I've done there is I've just taken the line which they had. So this is in loot table at the moment. It's just the full line of text. So it's just this as it appears right there. By splitting it by the commas, I then make a position at every point. So now I'm at so now it'll be 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now the next thing we've got to do is a little bit of housekeeping, because there is a way to get around this, and that's by, if we put everything on one line, we wouldn't need to do this next bit, but then it would make it more difficult with trying to select, rarity and things like that. So if we look at this bit here, in order to do it line by line, I had to press enter at the end here. And if you you should remember that an enter in Python is represented by a /n like this. So every time I press enter, actually /n is its own position. So when this splits, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and then the /n is actually a full position. So unless you do this next step, you might get a really unlucky hero who gets something and all they get is a /n. So we need to actually remove that after we've split it. And the way we remove it, we did actually use this function, this bit of code last time, but I didn't really explain it as well as I should have. So if I'll just do the top one again. So loot table common equals, again it's going to be itself table common, and then this goes on the end. like that. And what that does is it removes the last item in the list. So it removes the last item of loot table common, which in this case is just that /n. So that's what we need to do. So I'll jump cut again in a second because I'm going to do this to all of them. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a variable that we saw earlier, loot x. It's finally appeared. So this is where loot x is actually created. I'm going to create a global variable loot x, and we're going to use this in just a second. So what I'm going to say, each one of our enemies have a rarity. So 0, 1, 2, 0. Let's do this one as 3, just so we've got 3 different rarities. Oh. Let's do him as 2, and then the dragon can be 3 because it's the hardest enemy. So have I got 0, 1, 2, and 3. So I had 3 different rarities of enemies, and based on how rare they are will depend on what kind of loot they drop. So a 0 rarity enemy is going to drop common loot. 1 rarity is going to drop uncommon, 2 is going to drop rare, and 3 is going to drop ultra rare. So I'm going to use some kind of if statements for this bit here. Now, this bit, which is coming up, I'll program it and then I'll show you what it's actually doing. Enemy list. Oh, enemy list. Enemy number dot rarity. There's 1. Right, so let me just explain this condition here first of all. This is going to look confusing because we haven't programmed this bit yet because this is actually at the battle state. And like I said earlier, enemy list takes the 3 enemy classes that I have. So enemy list contains goblin, ghost, dragon, and demon dog. Alright, so the list contains those items. The enemy number is a random number. So depending on what the enemy number is, it will randomly generate me somebody from the list. So this here might equal, once it actually runs, it might equal, enemy list 2, which would be, so we've got goblin, ghost, and dragon, so 0, 1, 2, it would generate the dragon for me. So just because I've got that, because the dragon is there, I can then call the elements within that class still, just by using enemy list enemy number dot rarity. Essentially this, because this equals dragon, because the enemy number is 0 and the enemy list has found dragon in there, I can then use its class attributes. So I'm saying here, if the enemy list enemy number is 1, did we start at 1 or did we start at 0? I thought we started at 0. We started at 0. So we'll start at 0 down here as well, because it won't work. So if it's 0, we want to look in the common bit here. So, but again, we need to randomly select something from the loot table common list, which we have, which is right here. So in order to do that, we need to length equals the length of loot table common. And we're going to -1 from that. Now again, this is just like the time before. Whenever we are looking at the length of a list and then we're going to use that in a for loop, we need to remove 1 from the list, because just like I said last time, our list is going to start at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the rest of it. But when I do our for loop, it doesn't consider the 0. It won't take into consideration the 0. So if you don't do this bit, you'll end up with an extra position, and then you'll get errors later on down the line when you randomly generate something that's out of range. So make sure you do the -1 here. So length equals len of the loot table common -1, and then we're going to grab the loot x variable we made a second ago. And that is going to equal loot table common, and then we want to put a position in there. So, but we want it to be a random position. So we will use random.randint, and we want it to be between 0 and the length that we have actually put here. Now, because I know the length of my loot table, I could just do, okay, I know that there's 1, 2, 3, I know there's 4 items in there, so I'll just bang 4 in here and it'll do exactly the same thing. But what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to update that loot table later on down the line and add many, many more items to it. So I want the program to be able to automatically update to deal with that as well. Now I've got random.randint in here. I just need to make sure that I've actually imported random somewhere at the top of the program. No, I didn't. So I'm going to import random, very top of the program here, and then that will allow me to use random.randint. I think I did import it somewhere, but I think I imported it within one of these functions earlier, so it wouldn't work. So I needed to import random. So I've got random working now, and then this here will look at the loot table common, and it will produce a random number for me between 0 and the length of the table, and then that will be stored in loot X. So say for example the random number it produces is 1. It would take 0, 1. Wooden shield would now be in loot X. Right. And then I was having a little bit of trouble with some of the other issues, with something else in here, but this seemed to be the way I was getting around it. So I'm just making sure that loot X is a string. It should be a string, but for some reason, I don't know, for some reason it wasn't working. But this may have been solved by some other way. But it's always good to make sure your data, your data is in the right data format, basically. So what do we need to do now? So now I'm going to do a bit of a print statement here, and this will just be something that says the enemy has dropped a, and then ... And what did they drop? Well, they dropped loot X because that's been randomly generated for us. Drop loot X. And then we want to run the loot check. So we just do loot check. Oh, and then loot X. Now I did actually, I don't know if I've done it in here. In the original one that I made, I put like gold and stuff in here, and I had a class. An item in my classes which sort of tallied up the amount of gold they had. We could come back and add that in afterwards, but I'd like to just make sure the loot table was all working on the rest of it. So what it's going to do now is going to run loot check. So let's just go back up to loot check to make sure we know what that does. So loot check will open the inventory, it reads it, it splits it, and it checks it. So if you've already got it, it says it leaves it, and then it just backs out of it basically. For everything else, it will run inventory. And then inventory will open the inventory.txt, and it'll open it in append. It will write my loot X, which is my wooden shield at this point, plus a comma, so we can split it later on, and then it'll close it. So this here will actually write what I've done into my inventory. So we've actually done a lot of what we need to for this, really. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do my elif statements. So these are going to be pretty much identical. So it's going to be elif enemy list, enemy number, rarity. It's going to be exactly the same apart from the rarity. It's going to change each time, but everything else is going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to type this, and then I'll do a jump cut, and then we'll see what we're left with. Okay, so there they all are. I've got rarity 0, 1, and 2, and obviously if I wanted to create other characters and stuff like that, rarer characters, I could just add another elif statement in here. So the things I changed here, so obviously this is the base one I started with, and that was equal to 0. My next one was equal to 1, and then the length would obviously look at length of the loot table uncommon, and then loot X would be in loot table uncommon. And then the same for this one, loot table rare, and the loot X is in loot table rare, and then the final one here looks at the loot table ultra rare, and then looks into the loot table ultra rare there as well. So that is the loot table. Again, this isn't going to be something which is going to be able to run yet because we've not done the battle state, but we need the loot table working, or we need the loot table sorted before we actually move on to the actual battle state. So the next session that I do will actually be looking at the battle state. So if you just quickly cast our eye over exactly what we've done today. We made the loot, the actual loot.txt. I actually had to make the text file because I wasn't opening it up in write. I'm only opening it up in read. I don't want the program to be able to edit the file, so it just needs to be opened up in read mode. So I actually had to make that .txt file. Make sure you save it alongside everything else. Again, I got told off on Reddit because I am saving everything to the desktop. Obviously, if you were doing something a little bit, you know, you were doing this on your own, or you were doing this for, you know, your job or something like that, you would make all effort to keep it tidy and put it into a folder and then go from there. We are just practicing, remember. So we're saving everything to the desktop to make it nice and easy to grab these text files when we need to. So it opens loot table.txt and it reads it. So there it is there. You can make a txt in Notepad in case you were wondering, and make sure you save it as .txt at the end of it. Loot table common equals file.readline, because that will read the first line of my toot table, my loot table. Uncommon reads the second line. Loot table rare reads the third line, and loot table ultra rare reads the final line. Okay, so that's what those read lines do. So remember, they work sequentially. So this will read the first line, second line, third line, fourth line. Next, I split everything by the comma. That's pretty straightforward. We've used dot split quite a lot, and that makes them into lists. This nifty bit of code here removes the /n at the end of my lists, because I pressed enter at the end of each one of these. They all have a /n at the end of them, but you can't see it. Python can only see it when it imports it. So this will remove that last item. It just strips that back for us so that we don't have any issues and nobody gets awarded a /n and then it crashes the program. We make lootx a global variable because we're going to be using that in other parts of the program. We do need that. And then what we now do down here is we use if, elif, and else statements, which look at the, now, like I said before, enemy list and enemy number, we haven't defined those yet because we do that in the battle state, which is coming up in the next lesson, so don't worry about that just yet. So enemy list and enemy number, just make sure it appears exactly like you see it here. .rarity means that I can grab a randomly generated enemy's rarity, and if that equals 0, we look in the common part of the loot table. We look for the piece of loot is going to be in that common part of the loot table, and it's going to, the position of it is going to be a random integer between 0 and the length. I then just made sure that lootx was a string. I don't actually think you need this. I think lootx would be a string anyway. I'm trying to think. I think it would be a string anyway, but I'm just going to put that in there just to make sure. It's never, you know, just best to be safe than sorry, because something like that could just crash the whole program anyway if it's in the wrong data type, you know, because Python would just be like, what on earth is this? I now print the enemy has dropped A and then lootx, so whatever was randomly generated, and then I run the loot check variable. The loot check variable that we looked at last lesson or a couple of lessons ago. The loot check function we defined earlier opens the inventory.txt, it reads it, it splits it, and it checks if it's in there already. We leave it. If it's not, we then run the inventory, and the inventory just opens the inventory again as append, and it just writes whatever is saved in lootx and a comma, and then it closes the file. So now that is in our inventory. One thing I've just realised that I've forgotten to do, as I've just been looking over this, is I mentioned it earlier about opening the file. I didn't close the file, so after this we need to do file.close, and that is the last thing to do. Just make sure you close your files. It's good practice for later on down the line, although this wouldn't probably throw up an error at this point if we added more stuff in, which looks at the loot table and opening, closing and stuff, and it was already open, then we'd get issues later on down the line. So make sure you use file.close after that file read line just to close the loot.txt document. So we're just going to run this now. So if file F5, I am getting invalid syntax at the moment, and I've just looked through here, and it's obviously my if, elif, else statements. My lens here, I've not put the brackets this side of len, so I did double brackets on the other side, but I forgot to do the first bracket on this side. So it's a bit of a syntax error, so Python doesn't really understand what is going on. Run it again just to make sure that's just the warning from before. Everything else is running now, so there's no issues with that now. Okay, so if you enjoyed that, and make sure you come back and carry on programming with us. And if you want me to do something specific with this, let me know, and I can maybe add some other bits and pieces in as we go. Okay, well, thank you for watching, and I do hope you got something from that. All right, thanks a lot.